The day Frank Mercer lost everything, the sky over Grover Falls, Kansas was the color of an old bruise, purple and yellow and mean. And somehow, standing in that parking lot, holding a cardboard box with 31 years of his life inside it, Frank thought, that sky looks exactly like how I feel. He hadn't stolen anything, he hadn't done anything wrong, but in a small town, the truth moves slower than a rumor, and the rumor had already lapped him twice. Frank had been the principal of Grover Falls High School for over a decade, respected, known, the kind of man who remembered every student's name and showed up to Friday night football games even in the rain. But 6 months ago, a cheating scandal broke out under his watch, altered test scores, falsified transcripts, and when the school board needed someone to blame, they pointed at Frank. He tried to fight it, hired a lawyer he couldn't afford, lost anyway. His wife had left 2 years before that, said she needed more than a small town could give her. Her daughter lived in Colorado now, called on birthdays, mostly. So when the dust settled, Frank Mercer had nothing left in Grover Falls, except one thing: an old drive-in theater. His father, Roy Mercer, had built it back in 1957, 12 acres of flat Kansas land just off Route 9, with a hand-painted screen, a cinder block concession stand, and a projection booth Roy constructed himself out of salvaged lumber and stubbornness. For 30 years, Roy ran that theater, showed westerns and war pictures and Disney films on summer nights while families sat in their Chevys and Fords and watched the stars compete with the silver screen. Roy passed in 2003, and the theater had been sitting empty ever since, overgrown, forgotten, slowly being swallowed by Kansas weeds and Kansas wind. Frank hadn't been out there in years, but with nowhere else to go, he drove out one gray October morning, pushed open the rusted chain-link gate, and walked onto his father's land for the first time in a long, long time. The screen was still standing, weathered and cracked, but standing, like it was waiting. Frank walked through the concession stand, the old popcorn machine still bolted to the counter, orange with rust, candy display cases empty, ceiling tiles fallen in, but the walls, thick cinder block bricks built by Roy's own hands, solid as the day they were poured. Then Frank climbed the narrow stairs to the projection booth, and that's where he found them. Stacked along the back wall, 2 rows of reel-to-reel audio tapes, carefully labeled in his father's handwriting, and beside them, a bundle of letters rubber-banded together, addressed to something called the Grover Falls Emergency Relay Network. Frank sat down on an old wooden stool and started reading. Turns out, Roy Mercer hadn't just shown movies. During tornado season, which in Kansas is basically half the year, Roy had quietly rigged the projection booth's old radio transmitter to broadcast emergency weather alerts to the surrounding farms and rural roads where the county signal didn't reach well. Every spring, Roy would fire up that transmitter, and families out on those back roads would tune their truck radios to his frequency and know, if Roy's voice comes on, you take cover. And the concession stand, those thick cinder block walls Frank had walked through, Roy had never locked that door, not once, not during storm season. He left the door open and a lantern burning, and over the years, more than a few families had sheltered in there when the sky turned green and the sirens wailed. The letters were thank you notes, dozens of them, from farmers, from mothers, from a bus driver who'd pulled 11 kids inside those walls in the spring of 1987 when a tornado touched down less than a mile away. Frank sat in that booth for a long time. He hadn't known any of this. Roy never talked about it. Roy Mercer was just that kind of man, the kind that did the good thing quietly and never asked for a parade. Frank wiped his eyes. and for the first time in months, he felt something other than shame. But the feeling didn't last long. 2 weeks later, a certified letter arrived. The Grover Falls Town Council, backed by a developer named Hargrove who wanted to put a strip mall on Route 9, had filed to condemn the drive-in theater as a public hazard. Structural danger, they called it, fire risk, liability. Frank knew exactly what it really was. He hired the same lawyer he couldn't afford the first time and fought back again. The town council scheduled a final vote for the 3rd Thursday of November. Frank showed up, brought the letters, brought the tapes, tried to tell them what that cinder block building had meant to people. Hargrove's lawyer called it sentimental. The council chair called it circumstantial. The vote was set for 7 p.m. At 5:45, the National Weather Service issued a tornado warning for Grover Falls County. By 6:15, the sirens were screaming. Frank was already at the theater. He'd driven out there after the afternoon session, too restless to sit at home. When the warning hit his phone, he didn't think twice. He pulled Roy's old generator out of the storage shed, got it running on the 3rd pull, and threw open the concession stand doors, just like his father used to. Then he got in his truck and drove straight back to Town Hall. The council chamber was in a panic, windows rattling, lights flickering, and Frank Mercer walked in, calm as a man who had already lost everything once and survived it. "My father built those walls out of cinder block 4 inches thick," he said. "That building has sheltered people for 50 years, and it's sheltering people right now if you'll follow me." They followed him, all of them, the council members, the town clerk, Hargrove's lawyer, even Hargrove himself, a heavyset man in a sport coat who looked like he'd never missed a meal, running across that gravel lot in the pouring rain. They piled into the concession stand. Frank lit the lantern he'd left on the counter, same spot Roy always kept one, and for 47 minutes, 22 people sat together in Roy Mercer's walls while the storm passed over. Nobody said much, but when the all-clear came and the door swung open to a sky washed clean and pink, Hargrove stood there a long moment looking at the drive-in screen, still standing. He cleared his throat. "Guess it's not much of a hazard," he said quietly. The condemnation was dropped the following Monday. The cheating scandal, it turns out, was traced back to a records clerk who'd since left the district. The school board sent Frank a letter, formal, stiff, but it said what it needed to say. Frank Mercer didn't go back to education. Instead, that following spring, he patched the screen, fixed a projection booth, and reopened the Mercer Drive-In for the first time in 20 years. He added one thing his father never had, a small sign above the concession stand door. It read, "Open during storm season, always." And every Friday night that summer, families drove out to Route 9, parked their cars on that flat Kansas land, and watched old movies under the stars, just like they used to. Because some things, the good things, the things built with honest hands and quiet hearts, they don't condemn so easy, they stand. If this story stayed with you, subscribe now. There are more just like it.